I kind of started on the bottom rung. And I kind of demonstrated in the organization I was at that time that I had a lot of attention to detail. I was picking up on these things that needed correcting and also suggesting solutions for how those could be corrected as well. And that kind of caught the eye of the quality assurance department where I was working. And so I got asked if I would come over and manage the SOPs, the standard operating procedures for the organization.
Shaun, you have 20 years in quality assurance. That's 2 decades of being the person who says, wait, this isn't right, when everyone else wants to move fast. When did you first realize that you're wired to be the protector and the one who catches what others miss?
That's a great question to kick off with. I think the main thing I often say with quality assurance, and I'm sure yourself and others within the community will kind of understand that, is that you're a special type of person. And I feel like that's almost something that comes from the early days. You know, you're almost jokingly, you're born into quality, or at least having that quality approach to things. I think for me, you know, it was definitely kind of early on. And a little bit of a personal point here, I suppose, is that just to go into some family areas, is that I grew up in a single parent household with a younger sister. I was the only male in the family. So I think that kind of was where my protector element started to come out, obviously looking after my sister and my mother and things like that. And I think it just goes on from there, really, and how I've applied that to my almost like my work and my life as the years have gone on. So I think that's kind of where I sort of found myself in that protector role, and also a little bit around sort of where you come from as a child and what you're and how inquiring you are. I was always the why kid. You know, my mother, my grandparents were told I was the why kid by them, because I was always asking why was something this way. I had this kind of thirst for knowledge, but not just the knowledge. I wanted to understand, you know, why and what it was about. So I think that's really where that initially came from. So I think, yeah, being wired to be the protector is definitely from, I would say, from the early days. Also, I kind of fell into quality assurance, as you say, it's a couple of decades now, so a fair few years ago. But I started working as a clinical trial assistant. So for those who know GCP, Good Clinical Practice, will know that you have kind of assistants who support with that. So I kind of started on the bottom rung. And I kind of demonstrated in the organization I was at that time that I had a lot of attention to detail. I was picking up on these things that needed correcting and also suggesting solutions for how those could be corrected as well. And that kind of caught the eye of the quality assurance department where I was working. And so I got asked if I would come over and manage the SOPs, the standard operating procedures for the organization. So my initial involvement was reading SOPs, essentially being an editor, as I'm sure any of you have reviewed SOPs or even written them, find yourself in that editorial kind of position. And that was where it kind of really, that's where it grew from for me. So, yeah. And I think, you know, when you talk about decisions impacting patient lives and who that shapes you as a person, I think when you talk about patient lives, that's the key message. It's realizing that we do day to day is there to protect the patient, and that's the end goal. So my initial kind of introduction to that was when I was working at this organization, as I say, working as a CTA, as a very kind of low rung. I was in charge of managing the fax machine, right? This is dating me and showing how old I am. So I was in charge of the fax machine. I was responsible for basically filling it up with paper, making sure anything that came out of it got given to the right department. And, you know, one of the forms that came through late one night on a Friday afternoon was called a Form D. Now, I won't go into what the D stands for. I'm sure your listeners can guess. But what was on that form really hit home to me that, you know, this was a person, you know, this patient was a person, you know, who had a family and, you know, a lot of people, or I would say a fair amount of people who are taking part in clinical trials, you know, perhaps they are towards the end of life element. And, you know, I was very kind of young 20 years ago. So it really hit home to me that you know, this patient was a person and And that form was unfortunately the end of their participation, let's say, in that trial and their life. Yeah, that was really where it started for me. And, I still recount that story now, 20 odd years later, that was the first sort of realization of people and patients um, taking part in clinical trials. I think the other thing as well from a quality assurance perspective is being resilient. As you say, the quality assurance are the type of people who say, wait, this isn't right. Just as you say, in an industry where time matters, because not only is it patients who need this treatment, quickly, but also, time is money. Time is cost as well, as I'm sure any business person would tell you. So it's having that resilience to sort of stand firm in your decision-making abilities. And as you said at the beginning, wait, this isn't right, or is there a different way we can do this? Is there a quicker solution? And yeah, I think ultimately, it's about making sure that patients can trust what's happening, really. Patients can trust the clinical trial process. And I think, and I'm sure many don't, because, they just turn up at the hospital and take part, etc. But I think if you know that there's quality assurance, performing audits, doing quality control, making sure that things are going to the best that they can go, hopefully that gives those patients some trust in the whole process, really.
Wow. Yeah. All right. You said so many great things that I want to unpack. I have at least two questions for you. First, I want to take one step back, a higher level, because I realized as you were talking, majority of my audience is in the software world. And so working on, QA for software or managing software and so on, you're in the quality assurance of clinical trials and pharmaceuticals, right? As I understand it. So how does that differ from the technical quality assurance that a lot of people are used to? And are you all using, what kind of technologies are you all using in that whole process?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So yes, I work in quality assurance in clinical trials. We work to a guideline called Good Clinical Practice, GCP. And as I say, that must be a little bit different to what you work in or with. And our focus really is the patient and the product. A lot of the time in people talk about those P words, the patient and the product, because that's ultimately what we want to do is get that product to that patient. But we also need those patients or participants to move that forwards, to get those products out there. So organizations like the one I work for help to support those, pharmaceutical industry companies to run their clinical trials and, to help them move forwards. And so we can hopefully get the product to patients faster. And as far as, technology goes, there's a whole lot that is used within clinical trials and within the GCP aspect. The biggest one that I can mention is called the CRF, Case Report Form. And basically, that is how the investigator site documents the visit with the patient and communicates that to the organizations. I'm sure there's a lot more I could sort of unwrap and go into, but there is technology around that. So that's what becomes the clinical database for the clinical trial. We also have other things. We have electronic patient reported outcomes, EPROs, which is an electronic diary. So that might be an application that's on the patient's phone that they fill in to say, I've taken my tablet today, whatever time that might be, etc. The wearables is something that's also becoming more frequent now, the Internet of Things and wearables. So if people are wearing watches around their wrists that's monitoring their heart rate, pulse rate, on a regular basis and downloading that to an application, then doctors can look at that too. Even other types of wearables that are being used can so there's a lot of technology that is being used in clinical trials.
Yeah, certainly. Wow. Yeah, way more than I even thought about. All this technology, I'm sure, as probably every industry is these days, is impacted by AI and automation. I'm sure clinical researchers as well. How is it impacting you all and your role today?
So for clinical trials in particular, AI is still generally in its infancy. There are some organizations who are testing it out, trying to see what it can do and how it can help. But I think it's a fine line between, AI and automation and the human element. And, it's making sure that we find the best place for that AI. And it's important we find the most positive use for it. I'm sure if we were to say to, a patient that, their inclusion in the trial was due to an AI identifying them as being suitable without that doctor's input, they might question that a little bit. So it's definitely about finding out the balance. There are guidelines coming out from the clinical trials, regulatory authorities around the world. There's certain acts and regulations that are being developed and being released. And essentially what they're saying at the moment is that you need to use AI responsibly. You need to make sure you're documenting your use of AI and being transparent about your use of AI within clinical trials. So I think it's definitely something that can be used more. And I think we're excited to see how that develops in the future.
And you as an expert, how do you draw the line between what AI should be doing versus what deserves a human touch?
I think the use of AI comes down to what I mentioned before, which is understanding the right use of it and understanding what it excels at and what positives it can bring. Of course, automated systems can do repetitive checks really quickly. For example, comparing data entry dates, for example, or perhaps, a patient has attended a visit 6 months ago and their information is entered into the CRF that I mentioned earlier. And then they're visiting today and, the doctor is entering data from their visit today. The AI could pick up on the fact that perhaps a certain value, maybe a blood value, a lab value, has increased or decreased, and perhaps suggesting what to do with that and essentially flagging it. So I think it's understanding that it can do those quality checks for us is where I think AI could definitely be useful for clinical trials, and also making sure that trackers, we do a lot of tracking within clinical trials and we're monitoring a lot of things. And as I say, it's a good tool, I believe, for comparing, the past to the present. And that's really where I think we need to put that in place. So I think it would be very useful if that's how it could be used. I think for the human element, it's important for those decision-making elements. So when you're making a decision around the risk, if, for example, that example I gave earlier, AI could flag a discrepancy or a difference or a change in the data and flag that to the doctor. But ultimately, the doctor should then make the decision on what they see. And I think that's really the key thing, is that patients are people, throwing out a lot of the P words, right? So patients are people, so are doctors, and, so are you and I. So it's understanding that when you've got a person in front of you, you are still present in that moment with that person, and you're really just using the AI to kind of flag and help support those elements, really.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. As you were talking, kind of some things that aligned in my head as I keep seeing these patterns of the evolution of AI systems in different industries. Like, for example, at UltimateQA, a lot of the work that I've been doing recently is working with AI agents to figure out how to orchestrate them to build, test, and deploy software. And so recently, I want to say it was like last week, I had basically an agent that I created a feature that I wanted to release. I had one agent code the feature, two more agents review the code from the feature that this other AI coded. And then I was the final kind of like stamp of approval on everything I reviewed, everything that was done, and the feedback that was given by the other two agents. Sometimes I need to intervene and add some comments. Sometimes I don't, because a lot of times what I'm finding is it's nowadays, of course, it depends on the industry, as you're talking about. Seems like you guys in pharmaceuticals are still improving, still learning, while in like software development space, AI is evolving so rapidly. And so here, a lot of times the mistakes that the AI will make are due to a lack of context versus just dumb things. It does do dumb things sometimes as well, but most of the time the dumb things that it does is a result of a lack of context. And so I'm finding myself and other engineers having to be context gatherers from multiple sources and giving that context to the AI so that it can do its best job, and then reviewing to make sure that it's done a job well. And it sounds like kind of similar situation in your space as well, where AI can, of course, review data really well. AI is good. A machine is really good at reviewing data and then being captured and approved by a human. And it also just kind of reminds me of like the Tesla model as well. I don't know if you guys are having Tesla full self-driving in UK right now, but like here in US, it's starting to evolve. And so Tesla full self-driving is available and capable, but they're having humans sit in the car to monitor the system. It works really well, but the human is still there as a last final check to make sure that everything goes well, because there, of course, human lives are at stake. Similar probably is in actually your industry, human lives are at stake. And so you have to be extremely careful and extremely vigilant to ensure that nothing goes wrong. And so it was funny to me because I saw that same exact pattern as you started talking. That's when all the dots connected for me.
Yeah. And the other way that AI is starting to be used, in general, in the UK in healthcare is scribing visits. When you go to your doctor, or your GP, or you're visiting, or you're visiting a consultant at a hospital, they're often, writing notes maybe by hand, or they're typing straight into your medical records. So they're half listening to you and half trying to deal with you and help you, but they're also half making sure that they type stuff down into your records so there's a record of it. We're now starting to see that in some of these areas, they're using AI scribes to do that kind of typing part for them. So then, and at the end of the day, they become the reviewer, and they can then fully listen, and fully commit to you attending to that appointment that day, which I think is a great use of it.
Yeah, that is a really great use of it. Totally agree with you there. Shaun, as a quality leader, and of course you've evolved to become a quality leader through your career, what recommendations would you have for others aspiring to be in your place, or maybe be a leader, a quality leader within their organizations? What advice do you have for us?
That's a really good question. I think the main piece of advice that I would share is to network. First of all, I think, QA can be quite an isolated role or an isolated department in the business, not often seen as the good guy, if I may use that terminology, often maybe seen as a bit of a police role. It can be a little bit isolating, depending on the size of your organization and the size of your QA team. I think the important thing for me in these last few decades has been networking, finding like-minded individuals, knowing that you're kind of not alone, and that those people are experiencing the same issues and the problems and questions that you are. So I think that's really what I would say is my ultimate kind of piece of advice is to build your network, talk to people. And the other piece, I suppose, what I would say is, become that why kid, become the inquirer. Don't just sit back and accept what you read or you see necessarily unless you fully understand it. Ask why. Important to ask why, and to see if there's any better way that something can be done. So for example, as an example, as quality assurance, a lot of the time we're performing audits. You will go in and, it's probably being an auditor is perhaps one of the least friendly-ish roles when you go in. You're always met with a bit of a cold shoulder when you go in and do audits. And I think it's important to try and break down those barriers and to really help to demonstrate how you can sort of help and support and add value to those people that you're there to support rather than to hinder them.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea actually that you mentioned of networking. I don't think anyone's ever mentioned that before, but certainly I think there is so much power in, as you mentioned, networking, building a community, finding like-minded individuals to chat with and connect just on a human level. That feels good, but then also even from a professional level, having people that can help you or you can help them, also really wonderful. And that's something that I've discovered a lot as well this year. Specifically, I've been purposefully going out and networking with other technologies just to do the things that we were talking about here, like connection and collaboration and so on. What ways have you found that you like for connection or where can people go to figure out how to network or where to network?
So depending on the type of industry you're in, I think it's worth looking to see if there is any kind of association. So I'm actually a member of the RQA, which is the Research Quality Association, and that is an association that is focused on clinical trial quality assurance. I'm a member of the GCP committee of that association, and so that gives me great networking opportunities and people to ask questions to. I try and find an association to network with. And also get on to LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great resource for finding like-minded individuals. If you want an association, or if you want some kind of a network, create one yourself is something that I've also suggested to some people before. You can create groups in LinkedIn. For example, I give LinkedIn just as an example, but you can create groups in there, which you can invite people onto, and people can post into it, etc. So why not? Why not set one up and invite some of your close kind of colleagues and peers into it, and use that as a bit of a forum for those discussions. Yeah, I think that's what I would say. That try and see if there's an association you can join. There's very useful ones, especially for QA out there. There's a lot, whether it's IT QA or any other types of QA. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, wonderful suggestion, Shaun. Another question I have for you is, we've spoken a lot about many different topics. Do you have any words of wisdom for us that you'd like to leave us behind with in terms of anything, just any amazing life lessons you've picked up along the way that you want to share with us?
I will share something that if anyone knows me and has worked with me before, they will have heard me say this a few times, and it's kind of my 3 C's. And really what I've determined them as clarity, communication, and consistency. And I think that's really important for QA. First of all, people are looking for you for guidance and support and advice. So you need to be clear on your reply. If you give a very woolly answer, if I may use that terminology, people start to, maybe, I don't want to say lose respect for your responses, but I'm sure if any of you have asked someone else a question and they've kind of just gone, I think you could do this, I think you could do that, you kind of wonder why you asked them in the first place for some support, and it might not actually help you move forwards anymore. So the clarity in those replies and in your conviction is very important. Collaboration, as I say, QA is quite an isolated role. It can be quite an isolated department. Don't sit in the corner of your office, or if you're at home, don't just sit at home just getting on with the day to day. Linked to what we mentioned before with networking, try and get involved and have an opinion on things. So if there are project meetings going on, if there are other types of meetings that are going on in your organization that QA should be a part of or could be a part of, they might just not know it yet, try and get in on those. I've definitely done that in my organization before. And also with the collaboration as well, sometimes people can be quite shy coming to QA, because often they'll think, if I go to QA and share my problem or my issue, they're going to come and hit me with an audit, and I'm going to have more work to do, etc., etc. The other thing is to try and collaborate and to get those people to bring their problems to you in a way that they know that won't be the repercussion of that. If not, try introducing your own types of forums or committees. I've worked at organizations where we've organized, quality review meetings where we've invited people to come along, and they have and those people then have an opportunity for that half hour to get some QA counsel, some QA support, directly from QA during that time. So yeah, I think that's really where it comes from for those sort of 3 C's element. And so that's what I would do for the collaboration part of it. And the consistency part is also kind of going a little bit in a loop back to clarity, is making sure you're all singing off the same hymn sheet. And when I say you, I'm talking about quality assurance. I worked in big QA teams before, and there's nothing worse than somebody going to someone in the team and asking for help or support, and they give a response. And then a week or so goes by and they come to you for some advice and support, and you end up giving a different answer, a different reply. I've definitely had those situations, and I've had people in organizations I've worked for saying, QA are giving me 2 answers to this question. Which one do I choose? So I think that's also important, that within yourselves, as in within your QA department and your organization, you're constantly collaborating and discussing yourselves, so that when you are giving those answers and those responses is consistent as well, and making sure that you're sharing that between yourselves too.
Thanks for sharing that, Shaun. Where can people connect with you?
Would be to follow me on LinkedIn. So you can find me, you can just type in Shaun Hastings. It's all one word in the URL at the top, and you'll find my profile on there. And yeah, you can connect with me. You can see what I'm up to in my organization. You can see what I'm doing with the RQA that I mentioned earlier. And I'm also up there sharing news and information on updated regulations and guidelines in the clinical trial arena. So particularly if your audience are interested in seeing that, then I would say, yeah, that's the best place to follow me on LinkedIn.
Beautiful. Shaun, thanks so much for joining the Tech Heartbeat podcast. It was such a pleasure chatting with you. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.